Bank teller laughs at poor man's deposit, learns his wealthy secret. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their appearance or the way they carry themselves? Maybe they seemed ordinary, or even down on their luck, and you judged them too quickly. But what if everything you thought you knew about them was wrong? What if, in the blink of an eye, you learned that the person you laughed at was actually someone with an extraordinary secret? This is the story of a bank teller who learned a life-changing lesson when she mocked a poor man's deposit, only to discover his wealth and influence later. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city as the bustling streets of downtown came to life. The coffee shops were full of people getting their afternoon pick-me-up, and the streets were dotted with pedestrians weaving in and out of the flow of traffic. In the heart of the city stood the grand building of Central Bank, a towering structure that symbolized wealth, power, and prestige. Inside the sleek glass doors of the bank, everything was immaculate. The polished marble floors gleamed, the soft hum of computers filled the air, and the employees moved about with a practiced efficiency. Among them was Lucy, a young bank teller who prided herself on her quick wit, her knowledge of banking procedures, and her sharp eye for spotting the who's who in town. Working in such a prestigious institution, Lucy felt like she belonged in the world of the rich and powerful, even if she was just a small cog in the machine. Lucy's shift had been steady, filled with routine deposits and transactions, until she saw him. He walked in through the door with a small, unassuming duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His clothes were worn but clean, a simple gray t-shirt and jeans that looked like they had seen better days. His face was unremarkable, and his posture suggested that he was the kind of person who stayed under the radar. As he approached the counter, Lucy barely gave him a second glance. "How can I help you today?" Lucy asked in her usual professional tone. The man placed the bag on the counter and spoke quietly, almost shyly. "I'd like to make a deposit." Lucy raised an eyebrow as she looked at the worn duffel bag. "Sure," she said, suppressing a smirk. "What kind of deposit are we talking about here?" The man opened the bag slowly, revealing stacks of crumpled bills. It wasn't a large sum, at least not compared to the transactions Lucy usually dealt with. She couldn't help but chuckle under her breath. A small part of her found it amusing that someone would go through the trouble of carrying in bags of cash that looked so unkempt. "How much are we looking at here?" she asked, trying to keep her composure. The man looked at her, his expression a mix of uncertainty and hope. "I'm not sure. Could you count it for me?" Lucy shrugged and began to count the money, all the while making small, dismissive comments under her breath. She muttered to herself as she organized the bills, noticing that they weren't the neatly folded stacks of currency she was used to seeing in the higher-end transactions. "It's a lot of work for this amount," she thought, making no effort to hide the slight tone of amusement in her voice. Once she finished counting, she looked up at him and said, "It's about $2,000. She paused, then added with a smirk, "You sure this is all you need to deposit? You don't seem like the type to be carrying this around." The man's eyes flickered with discomfort, but he didn't respond. He simply nodded and thanked her quietly. Lucy processed the transaction and handed him a receipt, still holding on to the subtle judgment in her eyes. "Thank you for banking with us," she said as he walked away without a word. Lucy shook her head as he left the counter. "You'd think if you had that much money, you'd at least keep it in a wallet," she muttered, turning her attention back to the next customer in line. It was just another ordinary day at the bank, after all. The next day, Lucy came into work as usual, her mind still lingering on the strange encounter with the man. She didn't think much of it at first, assuming he was just another down-on-his-luck individual who was trying to scrape by. But when her manager, Mr. Thompson, called her into his office for a quick meeting, she felt a strange sense of unease. "Lucy, I need you to look over this account," Mr. Thompson said, handing her a file. "It's a VIP account and there's been a transfer request. It's a high priority." Lucy glanced at the file, then back at her manager. "A VIP account?" she asked, a little confused. "Isn't this just for high net worth individuals? I usually handle the smaller stuff." Mr. Thompson smiled knowingly. Normally, yes, but this particular account is a bit different. It's one of our largest clients, and we want to ensure everything goes smoothly. I trust you can handle this. Lucy opened the file and began to read through the details, her eyes widening as she did so. The name on the account was a familiar one, Richard Rick Montgomery, a name she recognized from the news. He was a well-known real estate mogul, the owner of several properties across the country, and a billionaire. In fact, he was one of the wealthiest men in the city. As she looked through the paperwork, Lucy's mind raced. This was the same man. The man with the unassuming duffel bag and crumpled bills. The same man she had mocked the day before. Her heart sank as she realized the gravity of the mistake she had made. The small deposit she had laughed at was just a fraction of his wealth. The money he had casually handed over wasn't just some spare change. It was part of his larger, complex portfolio. She had judged him based on his appearance, completely unaware of his status. Lucy couldn't believe it. How had she missed the signs? She had assumed that Rick Montgomery was just another person in need, someone who could barely make ends meet. She had mocked him, belittled him in her thoughts, without knowing anything about him. She felt a deep sense of shame wash over her. How many other people had she judged unfairly based on their outward appearances? How many times had she made assumptions about people without ever knowing their true story? Later that afternoon, as Lucy tried to shake off the feeling of guilt, a call came through to her workstation. She picked up the phone, expecting it to be a routine query from a client, but was startled to hear a deep, calm voice on the other end. "Hello, Lucy," the voice said. "This is Rick Montgomery. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Lucy's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the voice instantly. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "How can I help you?" "I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for processing my deposit yesterday," Rick continued, his tone warm but firm. "I didn't have the chance to say it in person, but I appreciate your assistance." Lucy swallowed hard, her mind racing. "Of course, Mr. Montgomery, it was my pleasure." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'm aware that there was some judgment on your part. I want you to know that I don't mind. But I do think it's important to remind you that appearances can be deceiving." Lucy bit her lip, trying to hold back the shame she felt. "I apologize if I made you feel uncomfortable. I didn't know who you were." Rick's voice softened. "I understand. You've been doing your job and you're just doing what you think is right. But don't let your assumptions cloud your judgment. Everyone has a story, and you never know what someone might be going through or who they really are." Lucy nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I'll be more mindful in the future, Mr. Montgomery." There was a brief silence before Rick spoke again, his tone lighter this time. "I'm sure you will. But just remember this. Never judge someone by their appearance. You never know when the person you're looking down on might just be the one who changes your life." The conversation ended, but Lucy's thoughts didn't. She spent the rest of the day reflecting on her actions, wondering how many times she had judged people like Rick, assuming they were less than they truly were. It was a sobering realization. The next day, when she came into work, Lucy's approach to her job had changed. She was more attentive, more empathetic, and more aware of the way she interacted with clients. She treated everyone with the respect they deserved, no matter how they dressed or how much money they had. But the most surprising part of the story came a week later when Lucy was sitting at her desk. Mr. Thompson came over with a smile. "Lucy, I've got good news," he said. "You've been recommended for a promotion. It seems your recent work has caught the attention of the right people. In fact, Rick Montgomery has put in a good word for you. He was impressed with how you handled things after the situation with the deposit." Lucy's eyes widened. "Mr. Montgomery, he really recommended me?" "Yes," Mr. Thompson replied with a grin. "And I think it's time for you to move up. You've shown that you can handle the bigger clients." Lucy couldn't believe it. The same man she had mocked just days ago had turned out to be the one who would help her advance in her career. It was a moment of redemption, one that reminded her how important it was to treat everyone with respect, no matter who they appeared to be. The lesson was clear. Never judge a book by its cover. Life is full of surprises, and the people we think are insignificant may turn out to be the ones who make the biggest impact. Empathy and respect are the keys to success both in life and in business. In the end, Lucy realized that it wasn't just about the money or the power. It was about the connections we make when we treat people with kindness and understanding.